Well, I want to say hello and good morning to our listeners from around the world. I want to welcome you to another edition of This Morning with Soulivity, broadcasting live from our studio right here in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and on KMET 1490 AM radio in Southern California. My name is Brian Wesley Johnson, and I'm so glad you joined us this morning. We have a fantastic show. But before we get to that, I want to introduce my beautiful and special friend and co-host, Sheila Applegate. Good morning,
Good
Sheila.
morning, Brian.
How has your week started so far?
It's going pretty well. It's a busy week for me, but that's good.
Right. Same here. Same here.
Yeah.
Like a lot of stuff going on, a lot of things happening. Are we still in retrograde?
We're always in retrograde.
Right. In some, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, yeah,
I don't know. It's funny because you said that because we were talking about how so many people I've noticed that I work with or have seen or talked to are going through a lot of emotional release. And someone wrote that exact thing to me. I'm just going to say Mercury's in retrograde. It seems like it always is. And
Or
that's how
like
I feel.
Venus is in
Right.
retrograde, or something else is in retrograde, and they all
It's
mean
in
so
the
many different
stars.
things,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we need to do a show on that to like clarify it for folks because it's like um I think everybody's more familiar with Mercury, but I don't think they're familiar with the other planets and what that really
Right.
means sometimes.
Yeah. And then we have that. I don't know if you remember, but on the show I did about Pluto is
Yeah.
um and that's a 2-year thing. So we're still right in the middle of that as a country,
Wow.
which is pretty obvious. So even though I don't do much with astrology, I definitely feel the impacts.
Wow. Well, we need to do that. Listen, everybody, we've got a fantastic show today. We're going to be talking about terms that we use and how they relate to acceptance in today's society. So we're going to be talking about that in just a minute. But before we get started, I want to remind our listeners and our viewers from around the world, listen, you are part of this conversation. So we want your questions, your comments, your thoughts. Just post them right to the live chat when we're broadcasting here on our live feeds on Facebook and YouTube. And we'll do some shout outs to you. We'll get your comments on our feed so that everybody can join in and we can have a great conversation that empowers. So, with that, as I said before, we're going to be talking about terms and acceptance in today's society. But to set up today's topic, Sheila, you found this fantastic small clip from a well-known YouTuber. His name is Bo of the Fifth Column. I'm sure people know about him. He's got like over 800,000 subscribers on YouTube, who provides, as he calls it, the discussions of a Southern journalist who is tired of a lack of common sense. And I'm sure that a lot of people have seen him. There's been clips of him on different shows across the spectrum. But specifically, Sheila, before we get to listening to this clip, what do you want us to know about it?
Well, first of all, I love Bo. I think I've been
Yeah,
listening
yeah.
since pretty much the beginning of the show, and one of the things I love about Bo is that he talks about things that are not in my wheelhouse. You know, what's going on with the war or government or politics that I don't. But no matter what. And no matter what his background is, I'm always like, wow, he is so in alignment with um, what I think and how I feel.
Right.
And this particularly has to do with a letter that was written to both about how he has addressed the transgender community throughout
Mm-hmm.
the years.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit really close to home. And I can tell you more about that after we hear the clip.
All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and listen to this clip real quick.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So, today we are going to talk about terminology and a message I was sent. This might be particularly interesting for people who are my age or older. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and read the message, and then we'll go from there. Bo, I've watched you for years, and I want to start by saying I can't thank you enough for the support you've given my community. I live in Georgia, and we have support here, but it's mostly from people from the cities and who are obviously from the cities. Subtext, you look like a redneck. You've always been nothing but supportive, so I'd hate to ask you to do something else, but this is really important. And like you say, sometimes it's the messenger. You have a lot of literal boomers and Gen X watching you, and that's who needs to hear this. I was at a group event for parents, and they all talked about how they had a hard time with the terminology. These are parents who are willing to show up to a meeting with their adult trans kids, and they all said they were constantly afraid they'd get some word wrong. You are a very awkward ally sometimes. You pause, and I can see you actually searching for the right word. I laugh out loud every time you are forced to say the word cis. You get awkward around the terminology, and you've made some bad analogies in your early videos. You once actually compared me to a lamp, for heck's sake. And you referred to non-binary people as whatever else once. I remember that. But nobody has ever doubted you were anything but supportive. And over the years, you've gotten so much better, but you still have to think about it. I think it would be really helpful for people to understand that none of us expect them to get everything right or to be completely comfortable with it right away or even years later. We just want to be treated with love or at least basic respect. I have no idea how you'd make this a video, but people really need to hear about how you were, quote, less than ideal in the beginning, but you were always supportive, even when you were awkward, and you have a huge trans following. All we really want is for the people who loved us yesterday to love us today and to get the basic amount of respect anybody else gets. People shouldn't be terrified at getting some term wrong. If you're trying, it's okay, and we'll see it. I hope you can come up with some way to deliver this well, because I don't really know how to make this clear other than pointing to you and saying, look at some of the things this donkey has said. But since they were always said in love and support, we love him. I will try to come up with some way to get this message out to people.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. It really,
Mm.
I even love his, his subtle sarcasm at the end, like, because that is
Right.
his way of getting it out, right?
Right. It's like I'm reading
I
this note.
appreciate that part of him.
We'll figure out some way. I can't put my finger on it.
Let me get the right words.
I mean, I really appreciated hearing this today. So Sheila, first and foremost, thank you for finding this and sharing it. What were the additional thoughts that you had when you listened to this?
Well, what my first thought is, because it happens a lot, is thanks, Bo. Because when I want to make a topic, like I wanted to talk about this topic, but I didn't know how to bring it up, or how to start it or connect it to the world. And then this clip came in. I'm like, oh, well, thanks. Thanks for doing my job.
Thank
for getting
you.
me the startup point. But
Right.
as a Gen Xer, and I read a comment under this clip on his channel, and it was a Gen Xer saying about how, like, with our generation, we weren't raised this way, but we try to raise our children this way, and we're trying to be open, but we're like this middle bridge. And I can really relate to that, right? Because it's something that I've experienced as a parent. I actually have I have a millennial and a Gen Z
Right.
child, and they're only 2 years apart. So, but there's differences even though in those 2 years. But because of that, also they sort of both can kind of be, have attributes of both of those generations, even though it's
Mhm.
all a spectrum. So, I've had a lot of experience over the last 15 or more years
Mhm.
of being, even a friend of my own transitioning, my age transitioning, and then with the friends of my children transitioning or finding the the words that describe them, the pronouns that they
Right.
feel they resonate with.
Right.
Um, and so I've been practicing that a lot, and I've tried to raise my children with as much acceptance as possible. But you
Mhm.
look at the next generation and how it goes further than us, which it should. And that always makes me excited. Um, but I've made mistakes with
Of course.
friends, with my children's friends,
Of
and
course.
then when one of my children, chose the pronouns they and them, it was a it it resonated, it made sense since they were a child, like, of course, right? Like,
Mhm.
I actually even expected it and was
Right.
waiting for them and setting up the place for them to share what pronoun, but they were still deciding, but it's still difficult as a mom, so I related to the parents.
Yeah.
I related to the thought of, like, how do we bring this up in public? How are we in an LA? I feel like I'm an awkward LA. Let's leave it at that for now, and then we'll go through all the awkwardness.
You know, before we go to break, it's so interesting that we're talking about this today. Um, uh, Offline, I was telling you about having this dinner with a friend of mine yesterday,
Mhm,
and he's a father of four, and his daughter is gay.
mhm,
And one of the things that he in terms of his relationship with her is very early on in, like, when she was in her teenage years. I mean, people come into more awareness as they go through puberty.
mhm,
And he, quote unquote, nipped that in the bud. Like, listen,
mhm,
I accept you as you. You're my daughter, period. So, whatever that means, I'm down for.
mhm.
And so it just, I thought about today's show and I was like, wow, we're talking about how the
Right.
that we use and the importance of making sure that we're using terms that generate the feelings that you get it, right?
Mhm.
Other people, right? Who may not, that don't conform to the historic norms of yesteryear, right?
Right.
And so I just had to mention that, as like,
Mhm.
I, parenting and is, I think, sometimes the beginning, right, of the process, and parents that fully accept their children change the paradigm,
Right.
start at least beginning to do that. So listen, we're going to take a quick break, and we come back. Sheila, I'm going to come to you and have you as a parent kind of guide us through this conversation today, specifically about the language, right? The language in different
Mhm.
cultural groups and and minorities that are here, specifically in the United States, but around the world. So we'll be right back. We're going to take a really quick break.
6 years ago, when I started Soulivity, my vision was to support everyone in improving their life. through the discovery of their passion and purpose so they can become the best version of themselves, to battle fear and ignorance, and create a better world today. Get inspired to live your passion and purpose. Visit Soulivity.com now.
And we're back with more of This Morning with Soulivity. I told you that's going to be a quick break. Sheila Applegate is with us today as my co-host, and we're talking about terms and acceptance in today's society. And a major part of this is the language that we use, right?
Mhm.
That kind of signifies in others, oh, you got it, right? You got it, you understand me, you're validating me, right?
Mhm.
And then as more people do that, our society as a whole starts to change. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that the line that you just said, as more people do that, we change as a
Mhm,
society, is
mhm,
so important. Because
mhm.
like I said, I was dedicated to this for a long time, to
Right.
trying to use the right pronouns for people, to understanding um, the LGBTQ community for a long, long time, and then transgender community. I've been more understanding in the last 15 years or so. But it is a process. It is a process of understanding, and the willingness, that awkward ally is so important. Just the willingness
Mhm.
to learn and to try. And I think that um, as it's interesting, because I will go to, like, when I was using the pronouns for my own child, even after I really thought, I'd used it for a lot of people, I understood it, I was an ally of it. It was different when I started to use it for my own child, and it's not because they I felt, any like, it felt correct,
Mm.
but what I noticed is that because it was a shift in later life, and so it's not this huge announcement, um, one of the first things I noticed is that as I was just getting used to it, I or had just kind of, it had been the decision. I was at a party and with people I hadn't seen in a long time and didn't know me all that well. And how many people asked about each of my children through gender. And so what I noticed in that moment was my brain couldn't focus on the conversation, because I was thinking about the pronouns. I was thinking about, do I tell this person? Do I, if I don't stop this conversation, if I stop the conversation, that's all we're going to talk about. And I wanted to talk about my child because they're
Mhm.
brilliant, right?
Right.
And so what I thought about was how the person who is identifying with a certain pronoun feels when people are misusing it, because it takes you right out of the conversation and into this spin, or it took me out of a conversation and into this sort of, like, having to decide, what do I do next? What do I say? Do I say nothing? Do I, and it just hurt. And I felt like I got a slight
Mm.
window in to what it must have felt like for people who are having that disrespected, right? If someone doesn't know, you're not disrespecting them. You just go into this. They're not disrespecting, if you don't know, you're not disrespecting the person, but the person receiving it, I think, goes into this whole decision about, do I ignore it? Do I say something? And how will that change the conversation when I just want to talk?
Mhm. Mhm.
Does
Mhm.
that make sense? How
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does.
and I think when I felt that, then it became even more intense for me, right? Because when I messed up, I felt like, "Oh, geez, I just hurt that person." Um,
Yeah. And we're talking about, not just anybody.
right.
You're talking about these beautiful beings that were birthed out of your experience as a mother.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so you just, talk about PhD level. Learning full acceptance of your loved ones, right?
Right.
Which then in turn, I can only imagine amplifies the what's the word I'm looking for? The proactive precaution of assuming,
Right.
right? That
That yes.
right? Because there's that part too.
And that's such an important part. That is the part I wanted to stress, just going to the dentist office or the acupuncturist. It's like the simple conversations that we have
Yes.
with people,
Yes.
we have no idea. Like until we change this as a society to just not assume,
Mhm.
we have no idea how much we categorize people that we in just, shooting the breeze, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so yeah. So it becomes important to me to try to change not just my behavior for the people who or my terminology for the people who acknowledge it, but to try to normalize it into my vocabulary. And if I don't know somebody's pronouns, um, use they maybe, or ask them.
Right. And I know and listen, I know that our listeners, some of our listeners will find it quote unquote weird and um to even ask the question.
Mhm.
Um but I would stress again, like you have stressed, that it wasn't too long ago, and it's probably still happening, that there are a lot of assumptions and
Mhm.
stereotypes that are currently, unfortunately, cornerstones of our modern society, right?
Mhm.
And I guess we'll get into a little bit of this late, in the next segment, but how we talk about people, even
Right.
in racial minorities,
Mhm. Right.
where one of the things that I grew up hearing a lot was not in the black community, but communities outside the black community, when they would hear a black person who is educated, for instance, and they would
Mm.
say, "Oh, he speaks so eloquently
Right.
or so intelligently," and it's like, what else are we supposed to do? Because you don't hear that language used when a white person, for example, gives a speech
Right.
that's really beautiful and that kind of thing. They'll say, "Wow, that was a beautiful speech,"
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Not that, "Oh well,
They speak.
they speak well."
Right. They got all the words.
Exactly. In fact, why don't we keep going with this? Because I don't want to break the flow of what we're talking about right now. Um, have you experienced that as well, Sheila? I mean, like when you are around your children and um people use certain language with them, or just in general if they're talking about a certain topic.
Um, with my children, well, I experience it when people are talking about, gender topic or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
But I guess I'm thinking about it as I'm coming from a different perspective when we talk about being in minority communities, because as a cisgender woman,
Mm,
white woman,
right,
um, I don't get, I'm considered one of the norms. So
right.
for me, I've definitely experienced the side of being an awkward ally or friend or in a community. And so
Mhm.
for me, I am very close to the indigenous community.
Yes, you are. Loving it.
And that there's a learning curve of navigating, learning the terminology so that you're saying what makes the people, what that community feels comfortable. I find myself, more and more comfortable the more time I'm in that community. But then I have to remember even if I'm in that community, but with someone who doesn't know me, there's a different line of what I can say and not, what would be appropriate for me to say and not say. Like there's subtleties to it, I guess. And I feel like, sometimes in the Black community, if I'm depending on who I'm with and how much we know each other, I want to be respectful. And so there's, just a learning of the language. And sometimes it does make me feel outside of the community, just like people of minority feel outside of the community when they're in circles that look like me, I suppose.
I want to interject something based upon something you just said, and it specifically relates to the indigenous and First Nation peoples of the world. Um, I think that a lot of the language that we use and why it's been so difficult for the modern society to move toward and move beyond tolerance into acceptance, because those are two different things, right? I think that people confuse the two. But this idea of us knowing our history and then getting information from those people around what the true history is also helps to move us into a realm of, oh, well, damn, no wonder we don't use certain language, or we do use certain terms and have certain stereotypes around different groups of people because
Right.
we don't know the history.
Right. And I think the history in our country, and I'm sure in others, but I think knowing our history, not with the First Nation, Indigenous people, and the Black community, is so essential because, as you know, there's so many terms that we don't even know that where they originate from that are offensive, deeply offensive.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. I mean, this idea of when I mean, you see it even in the media, right? And I'm just going to use indigenous again as a it seems as though whenever you hear people talk about our indigenous brothers and sisters, there is a stereotype of them being uneducated, of being poor, of them not being knowledgeable or intelligent, right? That they're these people that were here and they never like really assimilated into American society. Um, and all of that, it's like some of that may be true, where there are, like in every minority group, there are a lot of poor, there are some educated, right? But that is not true as a whole. They are not a monolith, right? And there are, it is deeply offensive to me when, I hear people referring to Native Americans specifically in a way that's derogatory, right? Oh, well, they're all living on reservations, and these reservations are destitute, basically.
Right. You know what? When I would
I'm sorry. Woo,
No.
getting hot over here. Sorry, y'all.
I worked in a school in this community. Literally, like we're only miles away from the Onondaga Nation. And there was a teacher. I think she was a 5th grade teacher, and we had to go to a meeting. And so I was driving, so I cut through the nation And and you can't tell. I mean, the roads are the same, right? Like, but
Right,
we
right,
came down,
exactly.
we came down the hill, and this teacher said to me, like, she said, "Are we going to see teepees? Do they like?" And I was blown away because, first of all, even if they were
God.
in traditional,
Oh
it's not
man.
like that. This was not that, I mean, in reality, this was not that long ago.
Right.
Um, yeah. And first of all, the Haudenosaunee longhouse is not teepees.
Absolutely.
And
Which is
they actually have
exactly.
houses now, like, so
Oh God.
yeah. And it just blew me away. I will never forget that, because that's how uneducated we can be about these things, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot we have to learn, but I guess it comes back to me. And maybe you can say how you feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I liked the letter with Bo, because it's like, if you're authentic, if you are trying, then we aren't going to get upset. We might teach you, but we're not going to get upset,
Absolutely.
and we'll know who you are.
Well,
Yeah.
yes. And Bo, I love you, brother. I mean, because we're not going to get it right. I don't get it right a lot of times. Like, I have to catch myself. Like, we had we have internships that we have, and they're with some are with high schoolers, and I have to remember to ask what people's pronouns are before we go down the path of them working in that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Because if we're working together, I want to make sure that I am respecting how you want me to treat you, and for me to respect you as just an individual first, not as an employee. That comes second. I have to
Right.
treat you as and respect you as an individual first. And one of those things is to ask, what are your pronouns? So when I'm referring to you in an email or over the phone, I am doing it correctly. And even if I get it wrong, me even asking the question is showing you and myself, listen, I'm trying here.
Right. Yeah.
I'm trying, which is the whole point, right?
Yeah.
And that's, again, something that moves beyond tolerance. Tolerance is historically can be equated to unjust laws like separate but equal. I tolerate that you are here, but you can't live where I live. You can't attend the same schools that I attend. You can't be in the same employment arena as I am.
Right.
So listen, why don't we take another quick break? And when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about this. I'm loving this conversation. I know it can be a little heavy for some people, but we need to have these conversations because, I think I'll go into something that I learned when my wife and I were in Rome that relates directly to this. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be back with more of This Morning with Soulivity.
Have you ever asked the question, if I was to be anything, what would I be? Regardless of money, regardless of status, beyond popularity and fame. Living your passion, feeling your life has purpose. Soulivity is a space to nurture that which lives in all of us. A place where work can become play, and doing what we love creates the dreams of a lifetime.
And we're back with more of This Morning with Soulivity. We are talking about terms and acceptance in today's society, a broader discussion about, you know, how do we move from tolerance to acceptance, where all people feel respected, validated, and free to be themselves in all situations of their life. Sheila, I want to bring into this something that just shocked the hell out of me a few years ago when my wife Sasha and I, hey Sasha, went to Rome. And what I think what a lot of people don't know about Rome, because they just hear about it from movies, right? They know about the chariot races and the toga and people wearing togas and stuff like that, right? But they don't understand the deeper society that was created. I mean, they didn't get everything right. So just, people were being beheaded and stuff like that too. But one important fact is sexual orientation in Rome as a thing was it was not that big of a deal.
No.
And to prove that point, there were baths, huge baths that Romans used for everybody. And we're talking about people walking around naked and doing having taking their baths. And they did that because they understood early on that cleanliness led to less disease in Rome, because they had seen it in other parts of the world. They're like, no, we're not going to do that here. And so you had people openly bathing together. Well, when people openly bathe together, other things happen. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And people had different sexual relationships, and it wasn't big a deal. I mean, one of the emperors had an openly gay relationship with a younger man at the time. That was a love relationship. It wasn't like he was trying to use him or anything. They were in love with each other, and it was open, and nobody, and so people of different sexual orientations, different classes, different races, we've been around forever.
Right. And this is relatively new, the whole Puritan mentality.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I mean, we know in psychology, I learned it even back in the 90s when I was studying, but we know in psychology, we know in science, like sexuality is a spectrum.
Yes.
And it's not, and so our natural state is to move along that spectrum. And so is gender. So yeah, I think we forget as a country, as the United States, we forget, like we have this, because of our education, we have this ideology that's taught that like these people came to America to be free. They were Puritans. They came to enforce their Puritan mentality,
Right.
And we're seeing that today. Like, I think it's important to acknowledge that because we're seeing it in our society today, that stream of people that are still feeling that way.
I would love for early in our educational system. And again, it goes to things like this, like pushback against, teaching Black history, where American history includes step by step by step by step by step learning about not even acceptance yet, the intolerance of new groups of people that migrated to America and how they were treated. And I mean, things like, people generally know about how Catholics were treated when they came to America. But in the early colonial days and then the early days of after the founding of the nation, you had bloody mass riots between Protestants and Catholics, specifically that major one, I think that was in Philadelphia, where hundreds of people died, right? Because of intolerance and that kind of,
Right.
right?
Right.
When the Italians came to America, there was a huge another wave of that intolerance. And, with different language that was used to put them down, right? And while all that was happening, of course, African Americans, indigenous, that was just continuing. It's not like this isn't been happening, but it is new in terms of modern history. We're only talking a few hundred years ago.
Right. Right. And you can look at that and it's just so mind-boggling that humans are doing this.
Right,
but
right, exactly.
And then you could look at it, well, now most, Catholics and European descended people are just not separated now, so maybe we are heading in the right direction. I don't know. Is it a tiny step or in the right direction or not?
I think what happened was American culture is defined at its very base as that Puritanism. And that all these groups that came in basically, for the most part, basically decided, well, we're just going to assimilate into that. And they've accepted that in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not talking about minorities, cultural minorities, African Americans, Asian Americans, indigenous, our Latin people, which again, I'm using a term that most people don't know, because like most people use Latino, which is the masculine verb. That is not correct in terms of what I've heard from other people. You can use Latinx or you can use Latin, which is a non-gender, non-sexual oriented term. So I think that's what happened. And people just basically said, we're accepted now. And that those other people, we can use those other terms with other people because we're not part of that anymore. Right. It's just, mind-boggling. How do we move forward, Sheila? Sometimes, part of me understands maybe how to do this, but then other parts of me are like, man, this is hard.
I think, and I'm glad you asked that, because I was like, okay, we need to bring this back to the whole acceptance thing,
right?
Right?
Because you can get really depressed and just like,
right, it can overwhelm us, and I think that it's okay to dip into that overwhelm because it's there, right? Like, because when we start to look bigger and bigger, and do we lose faith in humanity? But if we remember to just focus on ourselves and being that loving person, teaching ourselves to not just tolerate, but to understand and therefore accept, and maybe start to challenge our limiting beliefs that would put somebody in an other category, right? And one of the lines from that letter that Bo read was, all we really want is for the people who loved us yesterday to love us today, and to get a basic amount of respect that anyone else gets.
Wow.
And I think that applies to in every situation, right? Like love people for who they are, and be respectful. And then we go from there, because I don't, as loud as the minority that is intolerant is, I don't believe they're the majority.
Yeah, I don't believe that either. I don't believe that either. I think that there's a majority of people that actually believe and are willing to move into acceptance, but they are silent about it. It's kind of like, again, I talk about this often. A letter from the Birmingham jail with Martin Luther King, and you could teach a master course just on that letter. And he talks about this idea of justness and unjustness that supersedes moral, like law, like like laws that are passed by people and that kind of thing. And I look at this, and he talks about, listen, when something is unjust, it is everybody's responsibility to speak out and to take action against what is unjust.
Right.
And when you are when you put yourself in a moderate stance where you may agree that this is unjust, but you decide to do nothing about it, you are standing with those that are putting power and energy into continuing to be unjust.
Right.
There is no one way, or there is no gray or anything like that. It is literally black and white. You're either in the flow or you're not in the flow of that. And when you are in the flow of treating people justly, which includes acceptance, validation, respect, those kinds of things, you literally move into a flow where it's like, wow, you really feel good about life. You literally feel good. And it doesn't mean that that you have to agree with different people's quote unquote point of view, but it means that you have to accept them as your equal with equity and freedom and validation.
Yeah. That's powerful. And I think it comes, when we bring it back to the individual, that treating people justly can go into even the simpleness of trying to respect pronouns or learning a culture. Even though our education is not the best in the United States for understanding truth, the truth is out there.
Yes.
And we all have access.
Right.
Even if there's somebody who doesn't have access to the internet, you have access to a library.
Right. So
you can learn the truth.
And there's something that we've said here before that needs to be repeated again, and that is, it is not up to the people who are being treated unjustly to tell other people how to treat them. The onus is not on them. The onus is on us as a society, everybody, to practice acceptance. Again, how do any of us feel innately in our heart when we don't feel validated?
Right. It hurts.
It hurts. Yes, it
hurts a
lot because we don't matter. It does, may it be just, again, and I challenge people, just think about, like, when you're on a job and you put in a whole lot of time and effort into a project, and at the end of the day, you're not validated at all about your involvement in that being a success. Well, you can also say that about, other groups where they've gone through the same thing. Wow,
Right.
we are way over. Woo!
I know.
Woo! Why don't we get to some things that are happening with Soulivity, things that you're a part of, Sheila. We'll start with the Infuse Your Finances with Joy workshop.
Yeah, we have that coming up on the 13th with Helena, who is another leader of the Joy Keepers Network, which is a network of people around the world that are dedicated to holding this vibration of joy as we move through the transitions that we were just talking about. So that's on the 13th, right on Aspire.
Sweet.
And
then you got the other thing coming. You have got your other Matrix of Illumination coming up.
Yeah, we're coming up on the 8th of every month. I do the Matrix of Illumination on Aspire, and that is a pretty casual, informal time together where I guide you through a meditation and I give a channeled message. This time we're going to focus on the goddess for Valentine, which is in May, and Mary Magdalene, because I'm connected to Glastonbury and she is too.
Yay!
So,
And then you've got this fantastic thing on Soul Love that's going to be happening.
That's in it. That is a masterclass called Soul Love, the New Paradigm of Partnership. And I'm doing that with Vibeka. We'll get that link out for you. That goes live on the 10th.
Fantastic.
And then there's, there'll be more details about that.
Sweet. All right, I'm going to make sure that we get all these links out to people out on our social media. Sheila, thank you. This has been an important topic. And I want to thank all of you for being here for this episode of This Morning with Soulivity. We hope that you come back and join us every weekday at 8 a.m. Eastern for our live broadcast, or you can listen at 9 a.m. Pacific time on Thursday and Friday on KMET 1490 AM for all of you guys out on the West Coast. Listen, until next time, keep having real conversations that empower with passion and purpose and create a life full of high quality living today. We'll see you next time. Bye.
This work is subject to copyright owned by Affinity Global LLC. Any reproduction or republication of all or part of this is expressly prohibited unless Affinity Global LLC has explicitly granted its prior written consent. All other rights reserved.